It's been a while since I last did a conspiracy theory video. As I mentioned last week, this video was supposed to be a collab, but due to unforeseen circumstances, it's had to be pushed back a few weeks. It's definitely still happening, but it might be a little while away, but I'll keep you updated. Anyway, without further ado, let's jump into the conspiracies. If you enjoy mysteries, true crime, disappearances, and the occasional conspiracy, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. I also just recently set up a Patreon, so if you're interested in supporting the channel as well as accessing some bonus content, feel free to check that out, a link will be in the description. The first conspiracy we're going to discuss is about weather control. So this conspiracy in itself is quite a broad topic as it can be applied to a lot of different situations. But generally speaking, people that believe in this conspiracy believe that the government or the Illuminati, even if that's the kind of thing you're into, have the ability to control weather and use it to manipulate people and to control the population. This could be by causing floods, hurricanes, droughts, earthquakes, and other kinds of apparent natural disasters. Some people even believe that there's no such thing as natural weather anymore and that it's all just carefully controlled by those in charge. Naturally, weather control conspiracies tend to go hand in hand with climate change denial, or at least with the conspiracy that climate change is not affected by human activity. If the weather could just totally be controlled, surely we could stop climate change and potentially even reverse it. Now, I personally do believe in climate change, and to anyone who disagrees with me, I'd just say that it's better to be safe than sorry. Overall, making choices that are better for the environment aren't things that have to turn our whole lives upside down, and it's a small price to pay to preserve the environment. So overall, if you are a climate change denier, that's absolutely your right to hold that belief. But I just think because there's no way of knowing for sure that making these small changes regardless isn't really going to cost you personally much, but on the off chance that you might be wrong about climate change, it could make a huge difference in the long run. So for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to separate climate change denial and weather control and just focus solely on weather control. There are many specific incidents that people believe might have been as a result of weather control. In May 2013, there was a drought in California which continued into 2014. 7 months after the drought was declared, a massive wildfire broke out and was thought to be as a result of the drought. More than 900 acres of land were destroyed in the blaze. While this was a severe point in the timeline, the drought itself actually ran from 2011 to 2017. Despite scientists determining that the drought was caused by climate change, conspiracy theorists believe that it was as a result of geoengineering. They believe the rainfall in California was halted by continuous spraying of aerosols and the use of ionosphere heating. The theory goes that these droughts and wildfires would give the government the ability to control the population because the population were no longer able to provide food for themselves, so they would be completely reliant on the government. Former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has previously expressed that he believes Europe is using special technology to drain rain clouds over Iran and cause it to rain over Europe instead. He is known to be a conspiracy theorist, and this wouldn't be the first time he's vocalised support of baseless conspiracy theories. As far as I'm aware, there's no evidence to support his claims, and he himself didn't really give an explanation beyond Iran experiencing more frequent and more severe droughts in recent years. Aside from these specific events, there have been videos posted online in the past supposedly proving weather control, such as a few that were popular a few years ago, where people tried to melt snow with a lighter, and rather than it melting, it just appears to burn and turn black. It apparently gave off a pungent smell, which obviously sounds very strange and got many people believing that the snow was fake, but it's actually not abnormal at all. The black film on the snow is caused by the lighter fluid, which gives off soot that collects on the snowball. The large quantity of chemicals in such a small area can explain the smell that people experienced. While these videos were easily debunked, you can find many others online claiming to be examples of weather control. So overall, how much of this is theory and how much of it's fact? It actually turns out that it's not impossible to control certain aspects of the weather. According to newscientist.com, cloud seeding is a technology that involves spraying a powder, normally silver iodide, into clouds to produce more rain or snowfall. Despite this technology existing since the 1940s, it's only just been shown to work. However, the increase in precipitation is less than 10% and it isn't really cost effective, among other problems. Still, this makes the idea of weather control existing, at least on some level, a fact and not just a conspiracy. The idea that the government or whoever else can actually control, cause or prevent any kind of weather, and that they would use this for nefarious purposes, is still just a theory though. The next conspiracy is one that I'm sure you've heard of before, and for a lot of people it seems to be one that they just believe without any kind of evidence, or that they just completely deny without properly looking into it. So I thought including this theory in this video could be useful to take an analytical approach to it and see if there is any fact in it at all. If you've ever looked into expensive paintings, you'll know that some very basic pieces of art can be sold for millions. Take this painting. It could probably be replicated by a 5-year-old with no artistic talent, and yet the realised price is $86 million. Maybe I'm just uncultured, but I don't really understand how paintings like these can be so expensive. So to me it just kinda made sense that it'd be easy to use it as a way of tax evasion or money laundering. The popular method that seems to be the most common when people are discussing this online can be brought up with a quick search of Reddit, and is as follows. Let's say a millionaire hires an artist to create a very simple painting, then asks an appraiser they know, or bribes an appraiser they don't know, to value the painting at millions of dollars. They then donate that artwork to a museum and are able to write off the tax for that amount of money. The problem is, this is oversimplified and also unrealistic for the figures given in the image. It wouldn't be easy to get a painting valued at $20 million that you paid $25,000 for without arousing suspicion. The museum would also need to prove that you donated $20 million, and again, that might not be so easy unless they're in on it too. It would maybe make more sense to get a painting overvalued and then sell it for millions of dollars and use that as a way to pass off any earnings that you might make from illegal means, such as through drugs or even human trafficking in some instances. But that obviously wouldn't be as easy as it might sound and still comes with its own risks. Using art to launder money has 100% been done before, and people have been caught doing so. Matthew Green was caught by an undercover FBI agent plotting to use the sale of a $9.29 million Picasso painting to launder money. It's definitely not unheard of, but especially in recent years it's probably not as common as you'd think, as it's no longer as easy as it once was. In America, the IRS is pretty conscious of the possibility of art-related tax fraud, and donations claimed for more than $50,000 are independently appraised by the IRS to check for fraud. In the UK, art at one point could have been sold to anonymous buyers, but since January 2020, any transactions that are worth more than €10,000 have to meet regulations where both the buyer and the seller have to prove their identity before the transaction is made. From my understanding, the measures put in place by the UK and the USA do not necessarily completely prevent tax fraud or prevent money laundering, but it certainly makes it a lot harder to do than it once would have been, especially when this involves large amounts of money. Criminals can get pretty creative, so I wouldn't be surprised if many of them have found ways around this, but again, it's just not as easy now as it would have been years ago. It's not only risky for the people selling the paintings or donating them to try and evade tax or launder money, but it's also risky for the appraiser who either knew the person selling the painting or would have had to be bribed by them. For the right price, I'm sure some would risk it, but there's certainly less chance of getting away with it now than there would have been before. The final conspiracy for this video relates to the music industry and private prisons in America. Seeing as private prisons are basically for profit, it makes sense that they'd always want to have as many prisoners as they possibly could have in order to make more profit. Conspiracies surrounding prisons and how they not only keep people in prison, but how they make it more likely for people to end up there in the first place are definitely nothing new. This theory in particular is linked with the music industry and how rap music may have been manipulated to involve more crime and to promote crime, which would have then encouraged more people to commit crimes and therefore they'd be more likely to end up in prison. In 2012, an email was sent round to various people in the music and publishing industries by an anonymous man who claimed to have knowledge on this theory. It's quite a long read, so I'll link the full thing in the description, or you can also pause the video at various points to read the whole thing in full, but I'll be giving a detailed summary here. So this anonymous man called himself John Smith. In the late 80s and early 90s, he was a so-called decision maker with an established company in the music industry. He says that the industry was different back then. Since technology and media weren't as accessible as they are today, the industry had more control over the public and it was easier for them to influence. In early 1991, he was invited to a closed-door meeting with a small group of music business insiders, about 25 to 30 people, to discuss rap music's new direction. He was asked to sign a confidentiality agreement, preventing him or any other attendees publicly discussing the information presented during the meeting. Violating the terms would result in job termination. One of John's colleagues thanked them for attending and gave the floor to a man who only introduced himself by his first name and gave no further details about himself or his background. This man congratulated the attendees for their success in the industry and went on to explain that the companies they represented had invested millions into the building of privately owned prisons and that their positions of influence in the music industry could impact the profitability of these investments. He explained that these prisons were built by privately owned companies who received funding from the government based on the number of inmates. So the more inmates, the more money the government would pay these prisons. Seeing as their companies had become silent investors, it was in their best interest that these prisons remained filled. Also, the attendees would at some point be able to buy shares in the prisons. So their job would be to promote music which encourages violence, in particular rap. The room went silent before someone shouted, "Is this a joke?" Two men who were unfamiliar to John and did not seem like they were in the music industry grabbed the man who shouted and attempted to remove him from the house. John and a couple of others tried to intervene, but one of the men pulled out a gun, so they backed off. They were separated from the crowd and escorted outside. John's colleague who opened the meeting came outside and reminded them that they had signed an agreement and would suffer the consequences of speaking about this publicly or even with those who attended the meeting. John asked him why he was involved in something so corrupt, and he replied that it was bigger than the music business and that he wouldn't want to challenge it or he'd face consequences. He walked back in after saying, "It's out of my hands now, remember you signed an agreement." John considered discussing this with other people or even trying to contact the men who were kicked out of the house with him, but he didn't know how to find them and thought it would attract unwanted attention. He worried that if he spoke publicly, he would lose his job at best and he and his family could be harmed at worst. He goes on to explain how months after this, it was clear that rap music had changed direction, that raps about politics or harmless fun were being replaced with gangster rap, with violence and drugs being a central theme in most rap music. He asked a few of his peers in the music industry for their opinions on the new trend, but he was told it was simply as a result of supply and demand. Many of them even expressed that the music reinforced their prejudice of minorities, which could even be a whole conspiracy in itself. John quit the industry in 1993 and suffered a great deal of guilt over the years. He believed, in his own words, that the criminalisation of rap music played a big part in promoting racial stereotypes and misguided so many impressionable young minds into adopting these glorified criminal behaviours, which often lead to incarceration. The email was met with mixed comments. Some wholly believed John and felt that it made so much sense, but others thought it was a hoax based around a baseless conspiracy theory. People who believed it was a hoax pointed out that it reads like a movie script or a novel, so it seemed more like creative writing than a genuine account. Which I guess it definitely does read kind of like a novel, but I guess that doesn't really mean that it is a hoax. Everyone has a different writing style, and personally I think if I were going to write an account about something like that, I probably would have taken a similar approach. Others pointed out that there are spelling mistakes and grammatical errors, which is true, there are a few, but again I don't necessarily think this proves it's a hoax. People make mistakes. I often make little mistakes such as spelling a word wrong or even missing out a word when taking notes for videos, and sometimes don't even realise when I'm reading back through them. I can possibly imagine a situation where he planned in advance to send the email, and once he starts typing it, he just types it as it comes to mind without necessarily being too focused on grammar. Maybe he was even in two minds on whether to send it or not, but knew it was the right thing to do, so sent it before he could change his mind. It was also suggested that because the sender chose to remain anonymous, that this also must prove that they're lying. But again, I don't think this really says too much either way. I mean, if what John was saying was the truth, he was told that he would face consequences for speaking publicly on this, right after he'd just had a gun pulled on him. If it was me, I don't think I'd want to reveal my identity either in that kind of situation. I do feel that John reveals enough information in the email for certain people to identify him though, even if not the general public. His colleague who started the meeting would almost definitely know who wrote this, as John mentions an interaction they had. Why would it matter if the general public knew John's identity if those who he was scared of already knew that he'd blabbed? If anything, he might have been safer just revealing his identity. Anyone who might want to harm him might think twice if eyes are on him, knowing it would look suspicious if someone revealed this information then just died suddenly. This could count towards the whole thing being a hoax, but it's just really hard to say. We don't know this man, we don't know his mindset at the time of writing this email, we don't know anything else about him. You could speculate on how likely it would be that a group of 30 or so individuals would be specially selected to determine the future of the music industry, but beyond that, and just beyond speculation in general on the story he told, it's very hard to say either way. But whether or not you believe this conspiracy theory does not necessarily rely on whether or not you think the email was a hoax. It's undoubtable that the music industry can absolutely affect young and impressionable minds, even in the most basic ways. Most children and teenagers grow up wanting to be just like their idols, which quite often are celebrities of some kind, be that singers or actors or otherwise. So how far-fetched is it that young people growing up listening to this kind of music that does promote crime might actually encourage them to commit crimes? But the general situation explained by John is debatably far-fetched, and it's kind of similar to secret society, Illuminati kind of conspiracies, most of which are pretty hard to believe. The number of prison inmates has increased significantly since the time that the meeting was supposedly held, but there are other factors which may have affected this, such as tighter drug laws. So I'd be interested to know if you believe John or whether you think it was a hoax. As a disclaimer, the theories discussed in this video are just theories, they're not fact. This video was just for fun and I'm not trying to imply that any of the theories are correct. But with that said, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe any of the theories mentioned in this video? Do you have any other conspiracy theories that you believe in, or just ones that are interesting to talk about regardless? If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing and checking out my Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Thursday in a new video.